Welcome back to Incremental, the continuous improvement podcast. This is our practice edition where we go through improvements made throughout the week and tie them back to lean principles. This is episode 129. I'm Uriel Eisen of Austere Manufacturing and Arda.
And I'm Devin Bedoni of Like Precision. And our quote is, "You have to reject reason to innovate," from George Bernard Shaw.
Yeah.
I like it. I think, what am I trying to say here?
I think I would rephrase it as you have to suspend disbelief to innovate.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
The rejecting reason is kind of silly to me. That said, I also think there's been a lot of innovations that are driven from art because there isn't a reason. Like a lot of materials, a lot of from music and stuff. People have done a lot of like metallurgy work, just driving for. I mean, it's an unreasonable
goal
outcome
or
they're looking
expectation.
for. Yeah.
Like just better. Just always make it better.
And I think what I like about it is it's very easy at the beginning of a project to explain why it won't work or shouldn't be.
Yeah.
I think like the buckles are a good example of that. Of like, I just wanted a much better buckle. It is way, way, way more expensive than what is typically on the market. And if I was like I was very unsure early on if anyone would pay that much for a buckle. And if I had worried about that ahead of time, I think the answer I would have come to is no.
Right.
Because if I asked people without holding that, you'd be like, yeah, probably not.
Right.
I would guess.
That's the reason I haven't done most of the things in my life.
Yeah.
To be fair, as a younger person, I did approach most things with a like, why not?
Yeah. And then you discover why not.
Yeah.
Yeah. Same.
It turns out it's a lot of work.
Yeah. And I think there's good layers to add to this.
Yeah.
But I think it's still fundamentally kind of true that like leaving room for play and leaving room for just experimentation can drive really big innovations, I guess.
And usually not. My experience has been that it's often not. I've had this experience where I suggest a thing and someone's like, no. I'm like, you're right, but probably you're correct that this thing that I just suggested is very likely not correct. But if we pursue this thought for a moment and then we allow it to take us to a different thought, and then we allow that one to take us to some other thing, and on, we will likely get to a place that we would not have found that is a yes. And we won't get there unless we go through this one. Yeah,
and I think like the Toyota production system is a great example of this, where if you told someone before the results were in that they should do, instead of one changeover every week, they should do, 5 changeovers every day, they'd be like, no, because our changeovers take 8 hours.
Right.
Right. So like that just won't work, mathematically speaking.
Yeah.
And so you do sort of have to...
They were correct at the time.
They were... yeah, exactly. And I think that's, like you were just saying, with improvements and all sorts of stuff, even if you foresee a problem, this is like the go and see part. Even if you anticipate there being a problem, if you actually try it, you might discover that you were exactly right about that problem, but that there was some other thing that it solved, or just going through it again made you realize that you had pre-existing ideas from a constraint that is no longer relevant, or I don't know. It's like, it's very easy to just be like, that doesn't make sense for these reasons. And even if all those reasons are correct.
And sometimes it's this, like the funny thing where you're like, well, we can't do this because it'll mess up that other thing that we do. And then you go and talk to the operator. They're like, oh, we don't do that other thing because it doesn't work.
Right.
You're like, oh, okay. So that constraint that I've been holding on to for dear life doesn't even exist.
I feel like I just had one of those this week, but I don't remember. Anyway, some improvements.
Yeah. You want to lead us off? You've got a few more for the
Oh, sure.
episode.
I have The first one is kind of embarrassing. We use a speed rack next to our CNC for all the setups.
Baking sheet rack.
Yeah. And if you slide the the tray that holds the stock in on the speed rack, it has the shunk studs hanging down, which hit the next rack below.
Oh.
And so they just needed to be pushed up a little bit. And so a long time ago.
Why do they hang down? You have holes in them or something? You have holes in the tray?
These aren't trays. These are literally the tray that goes into the CNC.
Yeah.
We sized it so it slides right in there.
Gotcha.
But it needs to be bumped up, so we added these like plastic like inch shims essentially. They've been in there for probably a year and a half, not screwed in. And so every time you just kind of like make sure they're
wiggle waggle them.
It's not too bad, but anyway, so I screwed them in.
Nice.
Finally, yeah. Made it a little easier.
Cool. We got a fast scanner for uploading documents.
Okay.
Have you come across these?
No, but you mentioned it a little while ago.
Yeah, they're kind of cool. So the one we got, generic brother off of Amazon, I think it can scan 40 sheets a minute. So it's very different than your classic.
It's very fast.
It's fast, yeah. Very different than your classic scanner built into a printer that, is like, does the whole sound thing.
Yeah.
It's lower quality. Like you don't want to do photos or anything.
Okay.
But, so we got it for uploading material certs when our stock arrives.
Fascinating.
Yeah, because usually they're paper, or if we've asked them the companies to email them in the past, but then they will usually collate the entire order shipment into one document.
Oh.
Then you have to go through and like partition it out for each piece of material.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And when it arrives, they're just in...
usually they're
like each one was printed off, kind of.
And they're pretty simple.
Interesting. Let's see. So we improved the UI in Arda, kind of across the board, but in the shopping cart, we made simplified a lot of stuff, made buttons only appear if they're actually like relevant and actionable. Because we used to have like all the buttons for every single item. Mm-hmm. But if it's an email item, for example, you don't need the open the link card button because there's no link.
Yeah.
So just went through and cleaned it up a bit.
Nice.
Kind of preparing for a new version.
Oh, cool. Did I mention that we broke some probe styli?
No.
Anyhow, we had 3 different probe styli in the shop.
Okay.
And so we broke one of the, I think we had talked about, I realized that we didn't have the one on hand, and we broke it that day.
Oh, damn.
The day I was like, we're going to need a card for that. And then it broke. Anyway, so in reordering, we just standardized on the longer of the 2 options.
Okay.
And we're going to keep the short ones as backups. But going forward, we've taken that one out of Arda, out of circulation. Actually, no, we didn't take it out of Arda. We've taken it out of circulation so that we just keep getting the one.
Yeah. And why keep it as a backup?
Because they're there.
Like a backup in case you're completely out and need to run something?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, some extreme
freak
circumstance where probably we're going to throw them away in like 2 years is what I'm guessing is going to happen. But
right.
They'll be there till now.
Yeah. It's very interesting. I feel like you kind of had this clarity a while ago, and which is what led you on the wild goose chase of, not exactly wild goose chase of of your whole tool organization system.
The yellow brick road.
The yellow brick road. There we go. The wild goose chase down the yellow brick road.
The yellow carbide road.
Yeah. So talking to different shops about all sorts of stuff, job shops, fab shops, there's this temptation, which you've been in my space, I do not rise above it, of like, you bought something for one thing and you're like, well, I might need it again, so I'll keep it around.
Yeah.
And in a production environment, it's like, do you want to have this around? Because if so, you want to know it's around, in which case you should have a plan for replenishing it.
Yeah.
and have it as a standard tool that you have documentation on, that you know what it is, it's labeled, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
It's just, or throw it away.
Yeah.
Like for real. Because the amount of time it takes to be like, oh, I think we have that one tool we bought that one time.
Right. Yeah.
And then you're looking, or maybe you program for it because you're not in the shop, and then you go into the shop and it turns out you don't, or you can't find it, and then you spend 30 minutes looking. Anyway.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. Like, just so much of that.
No, that's real. I think if we didn't have these in Arda and Kanban and like the system all planned out, the shorter options, the backup, quote unquote, we would probably do that.
What's that? Throw them away?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. I think it would be the other way around.
Why is that?
Well, because you won't run out of the longer ones. Most likely.
Sometimes things go really sideways.
Yeah. How sideways are we? Like, just you break a ton?
I mean, I think we keep 2 on hand.
Yeah.
So
All
if
right.
you broke 1 in 2 machines.
Right. Then sell them on eBay and increase your minimums to 3, or?
Good call.
I don't know.
Maybe.
Like, if you need the length sometimes, it just seems like...
Yeah.
Whatever.
Okay, I'll do it. Okay.
I mean, you then need to go through my shop, and I have a whole tray of non-production tooling. Sam the other day was like, "So this has been here for like 6 months now. Like, what's the plan for this?"
Uh-huh.
I don't know what to do.
Throw it away.
Yeah. Damn, that sucks. It's like hundreds of dollars.
Right.
You're like, and
Yeah. No, I know.
still throw right in the garbage.
I know.
All right.
You can recycle it if it makes you feel better.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, okay.
Not
How
really.
does that like, what do you keep for prototyping? Or I guess if you want tools for prototyping, keep the tools for prototyping with some intention.
Yeah.
And then buy the ones that are some freak tool. Like, don't try to plan around having every edge case. But then it is sometimes useful to be like, oh, we can pull it off with this thing.
I think this is where like
I
a
don't
tool
know.
room comes into play a little bit. We sort of have this where when we did our tool standardization, there was a bunch of stuff that was usable. We were not going to buy it again. And but we didn't want it gumming up the works.
Yeah.
And we have a manual mill and a manual lathe that are, for the most part, just for doing internal stuff.
Yeah.
And so at those stations, there's like a drawer of end mills that are free to use. We also don't really want to be pulling production tools necessarily for those internal projects. So that's where a lot of that stuff ends up for us.
Gotcha.
And like, a drill index that's a bunch of high-speed steel drills. And we're not going to like reliably program with those. They're not necessarily super predictable, but in a super tight spot, like probably, I don't know, twice this year, we've been like, oh,
we need this drill.
go grab that drill.
Yeah.
We're going to use it this instance. But, so I think there is a case. I think it's important to partition it. So it's not.
Yeah. So it looks like we're going to be moving the shop, and partitioning one of the things I'm really excited about for in the more additional square footage is to have a truly separate area for non-production stuff. Like, that doesn't mean we're throwing it in the trash. It just means like it is not production.
Yeah.
Get it out. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we back in Arda, this is mostly Arda. When you generate an email order, you click a button and then it would generate, and then you'd have to like scroll down to the email section and then send the email and then scroll back up to the cart. So for that NPOs, now instead of having a separate kind of queue, it is just a pop-up window. So you just click it, it pops up, you send it, and you're still in the same place. So
nice.
Did that.
That seems good.
Most of these are just Kyle.
Yeah.
So,
cool.
I'm just the messenger.
Yeah. And our mill setup template sheet, like our mill setup sheet template, rather. We updated the way our origin location is written out for better readability. So I used to have, and a standard format. So it'd be like op1 origin number. So you put in like G54, G55, whatever. and then you'd be like op one origin location, and you would type out whatever it was. So it could be like X corner of vice, Y corner of vice.
And that's like an NC pass through, or how is
this is just good old mental typing.
Sorry, you're typing it where?
In our setup sheets.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, these are your... Okay, gotcha. I thought we were in CAM setup.
No,
templates.
This is in setup notes for
Okay,
an operator. Yep. But it was a little bit variable because it was every time I was like writing it from scratch.
Mm-hmm.
So it's this ridiculously simple, but we just put like X colon, Y colon, Z colon, and now there's less to write. It's always in the same order.
Mm-hmm.
Better readability.
Interesting. That almost feels like one, and maybe this is completely incorrect. Could you make it like a drop down and have standard options, or is it more variable than that? Like this vice front left, or
we probably could. I mean, I don't think the variability is the issue. Every once in a while it might be an edge case, but the bigger issue is more that we're just doing it in a text field right now. So it's not
I see. Not a drop down.
Yeah.
Okay, so we built out a whole, we've been talking about it for a while. I think we discussed on the podcast that Kanban, we're thinking of them as like items, kind of like for a probe tip, right? So like you have an item in there and you want to keep a probe tip in stock, or cutting tools, or whatever. It turns out that actually Kanban is a trigger.
Yeah, it's just a message
for work, typically. Yeah. Like you need to do something.
Yeah.
Like buying probe tips. Not we need probe tips, which is how I was thinking about it, I think. Like, but it's really a task. And so we unified tasks with Kanban. So now, like, generating a PO or invoicing a customer is the same. You need to do work, right? And so it's the same as, like, getting more probe tips.
Yeah.
And what that allowed us to do, really, this is always, every time we've, like, really struggled with something, I feel like there's been a point where we figure out an organizational structure that sort of everything, like, falls into place, and you're like, oh. We like finally got to the fundamental unit here. And so the production dashboard now shows WIP across all the machines in the shop and also the departments. And so you can just see where the load is in the shop and like what I mean, there's setup in terms of like specifying your departments, etc., if you want to, or but yeah, so now like if people aren't invoicing, then, or like getting a deposit or whatever the process is for getting work into the shop, you would see a buildup. Yeah. In that, we've started using it a bit for ARDA to build out some of those processes.
Like you've been using it internally in ARDA for building out stuff in ARDA?
Not yet, but we probably will. More like booking. I mentioned like booking rental cars. Oh, so like now a project is like going to, like going on a work trip is a project. Yeah, and that typically entails, booking flights, booking a rental car, booking, like accommodations, and a few other items, and then that adds to the production. It's like, yeah, you can go and be like, I'm in the admin right section, and it will show you all the outstanding tasks. And always useful to use the product. Because like in using it, even for the rental car, it was like, wait, is a rental car a Kanban or a task or an SOP? Right? Like, oh, okay, no, booking it is the SOP. Okay. But the need for it is essentially a Kanban that gets triggered when you want to go on a work trip. I don't know.
This feels very much like the Shigeo, like, what is a bubble?
or like process versus operation.
Yeah, but more fundamental than that. Like, what is a bubble? Well, it's a film and a gas and a liquid.
Yeah, but it is useful. Like once we
What
overthink
is a
it for a
rental
few
car?
months, it really coalesces into good clarity, I think.
You gotta take some mushrooms and think about it for a while.
Seriously.
So we got that fast scanner, and then Will built out a receiving workflow for material and hardware.
Very nice.
So, yeah, I haven't used it. He's still kind of refining it. I think I talked about this a little bit, but the basic concept is now, in the past, basically material arrives in the shop and we tag it with the work order that it's assigned to, but the material itself, it has no identity. And so now we're starting to do more assembly stuff where we're buying commercial off-the-shelf stuff.
Okay.
And need to, we usually buy more than we need by like, a couple bolts just in case. So we need to be able to track that. And then also the material, we're needing to track the certifications. And sometimes if we have extra and we want to reuse it, you got to go find the old work order and job, find the certs, like download them, et cetera, et cetera. So Will built out this workflow where now when material arrives, it gets its own ID. And then you correlate that ID to the work order ID when you actually start making parts with it. But it has its unique identification where the certs live, and as well as the commercial off-the-shelf items, and that stays with that. So if we ever use it again, then you just re-correlate it to whatever other job you're going to use it with. So it's still very early phase, but he built out the workflow for scanning the certs, creating the ID, printing the stickers.
Very cool.
That kind of stuff.
That's interesting. We've been redoing the back end of Arda with some of that, like realizing that, okay, if you do some work like making a buckle to an SOP, and then you trigger that and do the work and deliver it, right now the order archive is still tied back to the items and the SOP, which means that it's super convenient on one hand because it's all linked. The bad part is that work has already been done. So if you go and change the SOP, you don't go back and change how you made that buckle, right? And so like there's some point where things become crucially like this example of this thing, right? Like the bar of material in the shop is that bar of material. It's not just like a generic conception of
a bar of material.
A bar of material, yeah. Anyway, got that. Yeah. I mentioned kind of adding tasks. So that's been interesting. And the different like completion criteria starts to, I think, will allow us to do like pull where we can do completion. Like,
what do you mean by that?
So a task can be triggered. Okay, for example, let's say you wanted to buy a boat from me.
Of course I do.
When there's a process to make, let's say we're making boat style 1. There's a whole set of tasks that need to happen for me to deliver that boat.
Yeah.
But they're not all doable immediately. For example, we need to finalize the design before I can order.
Yeah.
And so we can make that task of ordering. I mean, this is nothing groundbreaking, right? Like reliant on completion of a finalized BOM.
Yeah.
And you can keep doing that, but we can also, so that you can't, like the task of doing the ordering doesn't pop up in your like, hey, do this until the other thing is completed.
Yeah.
Additionally, like we can't send it to assembly before stuff is received or whatever. You can do stuff like that. But then you can also say something like, we don't invoice. This is probably not a great example because everyone wants to invoice. We don't invoice until the shop floor has less than 8, making that number up, 8 work orders that are active, right? So like if their buffer is full, we're not going to push more work to the shop floor. So you can start to make it pull, basically, through completion criteria. So
interesting.
Yeah, I think that the downside is you can make a pretty tangled mess pretty easily.
Yeah.
So I think that's what we're going to have to get right. That said, like I was looking at it being like, wow, this is really daunting to be like, okay, here are the tasks for like at austere for a wholesale order. Here are the tasks. Because it's like, well, what a, edge case, this and that. But I was realizing like a good business has simple and clear methods for doing the work you do. And I think it's very easy to live in a very ambiguous state where none of that is documented. It is all very just unclear. Like it is confusing, and that's why it's hard to put down on paper how you do it. Yeah. But it is worth making less confusing.
Yeah, and also I think we tend to focus on the edge case because they do matter, right? Like they come up and they throw a wrench in the works. But I think we often use the edge case as an excuse for not beginning, and sort of like going back to the suspension of disbelief or reject reason to innovate.
That's a show title right there. What was that?
What's that?
We use the edge case as an excuse to what?
Not to start, or something.
To not start. Bam.
Live in the mix over here.
Yeah. It's a Devin Bedoni original.
But I think oftentimes that is that same sort of muscle where people are like, that this isn't going to work because of that. And it's really easy to say, we can't document this because of the edge case, this edge case, that edge case. And then you're like, yeah, that happens, but like, we'll deal with it.
We'll deal with it. The other thing that I'm reminded of is when just by handling the non-edge case versions of the problem, you'd probably, free up, let's say 30% of people's time spent on that task to focus on the edge case, right? So like maybe we handle that the old-fashioned crappy way for now.
The edge case?
The edge cases.
Yeah.
But there's like 7 of them this year, and all the rest of the things could just flow smoothly without like massive intervention.
Yeah, totally. It is wild too, like once you have some sort of like, I mean, we talk about this so much, and I think it's important for people to realize that like our systems are not wildly refined. And,
right.
Like, but even like the bare minimum of like a smooth flow, as soon as one of these edge cases rolls through the door, it's like wildly obvious most of the time.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, that thing's coming from a mile away.
Yeah.
Let's figure out how to get in front of this.
And the true cost of those starts to become apparent also. Yeah. So like, when you talk to a company and you're like, hey, can we do this? And they're like, no, like that's not what we do. You can go to a different company and have them do that.
Yeah.
Typically those companies are really good at what they do. Right? Like A, it means they can turn away work, but B, like they have a process and it's reliable and I don't know. Like companies that tell you what they don't do, like often a good sign.
Yeah.
Anyway, I have a few more I'll just rip through.
Okay.
So we added, the nomenclature is not good, but we added products, so you can create these templates for these processes. So like for you, a product might be like a milled part, or it might be like a lathe and then mill or something. It would reflect the like stages of a particular flow.
Yeah.
And so you can predefine them with tasks, with like optional components essentially. So like a component in a van might be like, we want a mattress, but we don't know, like the customer will define which mattress. So you can like block out all the things that product needs, and then as you configure it, then it lets you sort of push it into production
as you get more specificity.
Yeah. So like you can build sort of like a template boat
Yeah.
and then fill it in and then release it to the shop floor, and it will push over all the true tasks. But the real reason for it, well, it's the tasks, but it's also the, so some of our customers have some really expensive components that they don't want to sit on, like a $30,000 engine for a boat.
Sure.
And so, we want them to be able to configure a BOM, and then it just takes all of the items that have a minimum of 0, reflecting the fact that we don't keep them in stock.
Mm-hmm.
It pushes those into the shopping cart to make it really so you can do all your procurement through Arda, even for non-stocked items,
Yeah.
in an efficient way. So that was a good one. Talked about that one. We integrated with Outlook, so can send emails through Outlook, not just Gmail.
That's cool.
Yeah, you know.
I mean, it is what it is.
Exactly. And then the SOPs are finally working. Like the UI is complete. They work.
Yeah.
I say that with some hesitation because I'm sure there will be a lot more improvement to them and how they're tied into the other things and where they're surfaced and that kind of thing. But
yeah.
I'm very excited for that.
Yeah.
For Austere.
Cool.
And that's it.
Nice. So much improvement.
Yes. Continuous, some would say. Anyway, thanks so much for listening. You can find me at austere_manufacturing on Instagram and austeremfg.com, or arda.cards on Instagram and arda.cards on the internet. The podcast is at Incremental CI. Drop us a line. And we have a Patreon. If you want to check it out, please do.
Yes. And you can find me at lichen_MFG on Instagram, lichenprecision.com on the internet. And we will catch you next week.